Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. On today's show, we're going to talk about war, and more specifically, America's military interventions over the last decade, with a man who's particularly well placed to know about it, Andrew Exum, a former soldier, a thinker, a writer, who joins us today. Thanks very much indeed for being with us. Now, you are, of course, perfectly placed to fill that huge gap that exists between what academics say about the reasons for a war, what politicians argue in order that it happens, what the public believes to be the case, and of course what soldiers see on the ground. It was the point of the book that you wrote, in a sense, to try and explain from the front line the war on terror.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I think that we are all students of war to varying degrees. Even those of us who have seen it and have had experiences at war, our experiences are different than the experiences of someone who fought in the same country maybe a year later or just a few months later. Certainly in a place like Afghanistan, depending on whether or not you're fighting in the east or the south or in the winter or the summer, the war is very different. So I'd hesitate to claim any expertise on war, but I'm certainly a student, and I keep learning through both books and practice.
You've made the point that, in fact, in Afghanistan, where you went a number of different times, you went initially as a soldier and later on as an advisor, and of course, by then you knew so much more about what it was you didn't really know. So that and in a sense, that reflects America's experience in the country. You can go in fairly innocent and come out an awful lot wiser.
Well, I'd hope so. I'd hope that our experience would have led us to know more today than we did at the time. I certainly knew very little about the greater Middle East or Afghanistan or Iraq in 2001 or 2003 when I first went to those respective countries. I would like to think that we've learned a lot since then. Unfortunately, when I returned, I was struck by the degree to which we really hadn't learned all that much. I think in Afghanistan at least. I think in Iraq, our learning curve was very steep, and we learned very quickly. In Afghanistan, by contrast, because the war in Iraq was the focus of our national efforts for, really between 2003 and 2008, we really didn't get serious about Afghanistan until 2009, after the war had really soured in the public opinion already.
There was the question of that distraction that was Iraq on the Afghanistan front, but there was also a change, was there not, in Washington itself, and it went from ideologues being in charge of the thing to pragmatists taking over. There seemed to be a shift, and it seemed to affect both fronts.
Yeah, that's right. And it took place, it's not just so simple that you had these ideologues in the Bush administration and then these pragmatists in the Obama administration came to office. I think the shift really took place after the elections in 2006. You saw people like Bob Gates appointed to the Secretary of Defense in the U.S. You saw a couple different moves within the Bush administration, and I'd say you had what I'd call a triumph of pragmatism about the war in Iraq, certainly, and then I think that's carried over into the Obama administration.
With that particular shift then to counterinsurgency in terms of strategic thinking and how war is waged in practice, in the end, did it work?
Well, I think that's a great question, and that's still an open question. It's a very controversial question because if you think that it worked in Iraq, then I think there's the fear that the United States might think, oh, well, we know how to do this, and we can apply it to other wars, and therefore, we don't have to be as reticent about starting these wars. I think that the tremendous cost of both the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have made us more cautious today than we were in 2003, 2004, or even 2006. The counterinsurgency campaign in Iraq, I think the United States won the war. However, I think it was a Pyrrhic victory. The cost was certainly far greater than we would have thought, or than it was claimed at the beginning of the war, and I don't think it was worth it. I think that the United States was able to successfully break the back of the insurgency, but I'm not sure exactly what we won.
particularly given the events of the last few days and this renewed push that Al-Qaeda in Iraq have announced?
Well, in reality, that doesn't concern me as much as the strength of the Iraqi government. I think that Al-Qaeda lost strategically in Iraq between 2006 and 2008. And although they can still kill many Iraqis, I do not think that they are a strategic actor in Iraq in the way that they were in 2005, 2006. I'm more concerned about the structure and the power of the government in Baghdad, and whether or not that leads to, that leads to other drivers of conflict going down the road.
So, a victory of sorts then in Iraq. What about in Afghanistan?
In Afghanistan, it depends. I mean, I wish there was only one war in Afghanistan. There are at least two. You have the U.S. war against Al-Qaeda in both Afghanistan and Pakistan. We are fighting this war with our Afghan allies and with our friends in Pakistan. There's also a war between the insurgency in Afghanistan and the government of Afghanistan. We are, of course, fighting with the government and our Western allies, the NATO alliance, other Western nations, in support of this, the government in Afghanistan. And meanwhile, our Pakistani friends are in large part fighting with the insurgency. If you can wrap your head around that paradox, you're a much smarter thinker than I am, because it's confused me for quite some time.
And so, really, probably a growing humility, a growing awareness of the. You mentioned Pakistan with regard to Afghanistan, an awareness that these things need to be understood in their whole, that they're difficult to understand from far away, and that one needs to take things carefully. And you mentioned we've been talking about that shift in American foreign policy. And when you think about it in a sort of continuum, you had the war in Iraq, then the sort of change of approach, of strategy in both Iraq and Afghanistan. In Libya, everything was done from the air, and indeed America took a back seat compared to Britain and France. And in Syria, we've stayed entirely out altogether. I mean, one senses that there has been a proper retreat. Is that the direction in which you see it going?
Well, I think it might be called pragmatic idealism. I mean, you have to remember that the United States really had very few interests in Libya. You have a country of maybe 6 million people with roughly 3% of the world's proven oil reserves. This is not Saudi Arabia, nor is it Western Europe. Not a place where the United States has a lot of interests. But we saw the opportunity to intervene against the forces of the government. We had a clear avenue for doing so, and we did. I myself was against the intervention. I think my early experiences in war have made me against most military interventions. But it turned out quite well for the United States and its alliance, and I myself was wrong about a lot of my assumptions about the war in Libya. In Syria, by contrast, I think the United States, as well as the other, many other Western countries, have looked at that problem set in Syria, have looked at that civil war, and because of reasons of geography, reasons of international politics, it's not seen as ideal for direct military intervention. I believe that our Russian friends felt betrayed by the intervention in Libya, because of course we said we were going to intervene and establish a no-fly zone, but what we actually did was regime change. And I don't think that's what some of our friends in the United Nations had in mind when we of course announced what we were going to do. So they themselves are very reticent for us to intervene in Syria.
And of course, we've been talking about the shifts in Washington, but the world also has changed a great deal. So if you think back to Iraq, America was going in and provoking regime change or orchestrating it. With the Arab Springs, with everything that's happened, not only has there been a growing understanding of the complexity of many countries that perhaps Washington hadn't properly understood or got to grips with before, and as an Arabic speaker, you'll be one of a rare breed. They also are facing countries that are changing from within in ways that are entirely unpredictable and very dangerous.
Well, right. I mean, in some ways, the best part of the Arab Spring is that it hasn't been about the United States. And I'm not sure, you have some former members of the Bush administration who claim that the Arab Spring vindicates the war in Iraq. I don't buy that. I think that, if anything, what the Arab Spring has proven is that real change in these societies, it's a lot easier if it comes from within. We can impose a change to these societies from the outside at tremendous cost to ourselves, at tremendous cost to the people themselves. I mean, keep in mind, at least over 100,000 Iraqis perished during the war in Iraq. Iraq saw a brutal civil war. America lost between 3,000 and 4,000 soldiers, spent about $1 trillion. So yes, you can affect that type of regime change. The United States does have the power to do that. However, I don't think that's anyone's first choice. And one of the things we've seen over the past year has been people in the Arabic-speaking world taking their fate into their own hands.
Andrew Exton, thanks very much indeed for having been with us
Sure
today.
thing.
That brings us to the end of today's interview, but we'll be back very soon with another. Do stay with us here on France 24.